This is Comic Shenanigans, episode 1030, a conversation with Michael Eury.
Ain't no stopping them shenanigans. Love getting into shenanigans. All up in them shenanigans. 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 Shenanigans.
Welcome to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. This is episode 1030. I'm your host, Adam Chapman. This is a very special episode. This is another conversation with Michael Eury. Michael Eury is currently the editor of Back Issue Magazine. Definitely one of my favorite magazines. That's currently being put out by Tomorrow's Publishing. So it's a fantastic resource, and it's just such a fun read. If you like comic book history, if you like a lot of the kind of the Bronze Age stuff, which is mainly their remit, then you should definitely check out their magazine. I really like talking with Michael in this episode. We would talk about upcoming issues of Back Issue. They work really far ahead, so he definitely talks about the kind of upcoming things. We talk about some of the more recent stuff in the catalog, as well as future things to come in the catalog. We also talk about his work on the fantastic book. I'm going to get the exact title incorrect, so I'm going to look it up just so I can remember exactly what it's called, because it is a fantastic resource about superhero team-ups. And so he really kind of does an exhaustive exploration on superhero team-ups throughout comic book history. There's a fantastic resource in the background in terms of, in the back of the book. It's a great index, and so you can kind of look up a lot of different resources, team-ups that have happened over the years. It's just such a fantastic resource. So we really kind of did a deep dive into that a little bit as well. It's called the Team-Up Companion, that is the full title. Again, put out by Tomorrow's Publishing. If you want to check out the last time Michael was on the show, that was actually episode 982, which doesn't seem that removed from episode 1030. However, that was also back when I used to do 2 episodes a week. Now we do 1 episode a week, and that was also before the hiatus from August 12th to 2022 to August 12th, 2023. So this episode 982 that he was on would have been back in June 2022, June 9th is, I guess, the day it went live. We last spoke at June 7th, 2022. So it's been a while, far too long. Really love having Michael on. He's such a fantastic storyteller. He he knows so much about comic book history. He's adding so much to it by being in charge of Back Issue Magazine, which again continues to be an absolute thrill to read every month, or every month it comes out. It doesn't come out every month necessarily, but when it comes out, it's always worth you checking it out. As we speak, actually, the 150th issue is actually about to come out. I believe it's coming out in like a week or two as we are recording this intro, which is, I guess, what day is it? March 2nd. So it's coming out soon. I believe it's shipping March 13th, so it's coming out really soon. It's going to be fantastic. The issue 150 is an oversized 100-page super spectacular sesquicentennial edition. I love that advanced copy or color copy, I guess, of the solicitation. It's featuring Batman of the 1970s, exploring the work of Bronze Age Batman artists Bob Brown, Dick Giordano, Irv Novick, Frank Robbins, Walter Simonson, Alex Toth, and Bernie Wrightson, plus revisit Frank Miller's first Batman story, and of course edited, as always, by Michael Eury. So that is the 150th issue, which will be shipping shortly. So anyways, thank you so much for downloading this episode. Hope you really enjoy this conversation with Michael. I definitely enjoyed being part of it. You can email me at comicshenanigans@gmail.com, rate the show on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, listen to us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and many other places where you can get your favorite podcasts. Thanks again for listening. We prattle on for almost 4 minutes. Let's get right into the episode with Michael Eury. Enjoy. Quick note before the episode actually starts, I just wanted to mention episode 1029 originally had a hiccup when it was posted. It actually ended up having the wrong bulk of the episode. It had the proper intro or title at the beginning saying that it was going to be a Book of the Month Club on Spider-Man Life Theft, but then when the actual episode went past the opening credits or theme song, it then had actually the previous Book of the Month episode, which had been an exploration of Pedro and Me that I'd done with my wife, Kelly Chapman. So if you didn't re-download that episode, you should go back and re-download it now because it has not been fixed and it does have the proper Spider-Man life theft conversation. That was the last of my editor note. Let's get right into the conversation with Michael Eury. Michael, welcome back to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. How are you today?
Oh, thank you. I'm doing fine. It's great to be here today, Adam. Thank you for having me back. I'm glad I did not scare you away previously and that we're having another conversation today. That's cool.
So definitely not. So the last time we spoke, it was in 2022. So you were at the time kind of preparing for, 20 years of back issue. And obviously last year you had issue 147, which was the 20th anniversary edition of back issue. I'm curious what it was like to select what you were going to focus on for that particular issue. It was a great George Perez kind of focus issue. You have a really good, kind of the top 20 of George Perez's work during the kind of back issue era, so to speak. But what was it like to, kind of decide what was going to be featured in your 20th anniversary edition?
Well, I kind of think that George's unfortunate passing sort of wedged the timing of that issue into what was planned as our anniversary issue. I have to admit, I never really had a compelling theme for a 20th anniversary issue. And so other than just saying this is our 20th anniversary issue and just really acknowledging the fact, because what has kept us around for 20 years plus, I think, is just the way we present our focus on comic book history. Obviously, particularly the Bronze Age, which is our bread and butter. Mm-hmm. But, I didn't really have, all this content prepared that said 20th anniversary. I did in the past when we did a 10th anniversary issue, 11 years ago now, I guess. But, but the theme of that one was anniversary issue. So we kind of, it kept that one. And, so what are you going to do next time around? But it worked out beautifully because, God rest his soul, George Perez was just such a wonderful force in this industry. I mean, you don't need to hear me say that to know that it's true, but he just brought so much talent. But the thing that he brought, as you read in that anniversary issue, that I think is better than the talent, was just himself. His personality, his heart, his soul. It was evident in every line he drew. And if you met him, you get a hug, a big old buddy hug, and he'd be your best friend if you met him for the first time. He was just the most, what a wonderful guy. And so it's an honor for us to have been able to feature his work in our anniversary issue. And it also was apropos, because when we started 20 years ago, what did we start with? A George Perez cover. And, November of 2023, it was Captain America versus Batman for the JLA Avengers crossover that was going on there. And, we did a very lengthy pro-to-pro interview with George and Marv Wolfman in the very first issue. So, it ended up almost looking like it was planned to have the Perez issue fall 20 years later, but it just happened that way. But I couldn't be happier. I'm very, very proud of that issue. And proud of 20 years plus of this. It's wonderful.
Of course. Now, it's what I thought was really interesting. So you featured, kind of the 20 best, or these particular 20 books you wanted to kind of highlight. What I thought was interesting in terms of how you present it, it's different than what you would normally expect, where it'd be like a countdown of some kind, but instead it's kind of done chronologically. Was this, a very specific thought process that, it's almost too hard to try and narrow it down to a top 20 in terms of actual order, so instead we'll just kind of have it chronologically? Or what was the thought process there? Because I thought it was an interesting way to lay it out.
Yeah, well, again, that's a really good question, and you probably bring up the only thing that I applied to this particular issue that sort of worked into the mix, the anniversary concept of 20. I wanted something connected to 20 to be there, and it just came to me that a top 20, a list of George's comics from the Bronze Age would be an interesting way to do that and really just focus on some. The thing about, I mean, you want to talk about a prolific person. I mean, he's up there. He's in the top 10 tally of how many pages he drew in his career, I believe. With Kirby and all these other people who just cranked out all this work. And I shouldn't say cranked out because that actually has some kind of a negative connotation. It certainly wasn't intended, but they just produced this incredible volume, this torrent of work. So the top 20 concept kind of just came up. It was an idea of trying to figure out how to just spotlight some of what George had done, because we also had covered so much in the past. I mean, that issue was what, maybe I'm just pulling this number out of the air. I think maybe the 4th George Perez cover that I had in the 20 years of the magazine. And believe it or not, there's another one coming up, issue 159, looking ahead to May of 2025. I just got the cover finished. It will be a 40th anniversary look at Crisis on Infinite Earths and its impact on the market. And, of course, you can't do that without a George Perez cover, but that one is going to be the cover he did for the Crisis Index way back in the mid-'80s. And it's basically a kind of a tribute to the dead characters who died in Crisis. And there's going to be a major article on that, because the funny thing is, most of them didn't stay dead. And the weird thing, Adam, as you recall, the two big hit list names on Crisis, in Crisis, were Supergirl and the Flash. And well, they were the two of the first shows that the CW trots out as weekly series. It's just weird how that happened. But I digress to go back to your question about the top 20. It was kind of posed to the back issue writers, and we sort of hammered it out in emails and email dialogues, just figuring out which books should be there. A few of them, to me, just cried out they had to be on the list. Like George's very, at first, Teen Titans, that's just kind of a no-brainer. And some of the important things that he had done, like the White Tiger, he being the first, or one of the first Puerto Rican George talents in the business, and then to have the White Tiger was the first significant Puerto Rican character, and so George was doing that to help increase the ethnicity mix of Marvel's pantheon. And so after some give and take among the writers, we figured it out, and we're replicating the process in an issue that's coming out. Issue 157 is a Keith Giffen tribute. We've just kind of been blindsided lately, man, with so many powerful and talented people from the Bronze Age passing away, and significant folks. It's just been. I've been hesitant in the past to do single creator spotlights in back issue, because that's not our thing, right? I mean, we really focus on the comics, not on the personality. But with people like Keith Giffen and Neil Adams and George Perez, who had just been so larger than life, we just had to do these issues.
Absolutely.
And so, we just kind of pulled ourselves and just talked about it and figured out which 20 of George's works to spotlight, and we're doing the same thing with Keith. But it's not random stuff. We're not really, this isn't like an editor's choice. It's nobody's personal picks. We really gave it some thought to try to, pick a few books that Giffen did and then that Perez did earlier that just there was something about it that maybe was an indication of what was to come. A glimmer of something you would see in the future. Little things like that. But, it's just a wonderful way to kind of survey the breadth of somebody's career. And when you're talking about both Perez and Giffen, these guys, man, they were all over the place, weren't they? I mean, literally, they were all over the place.
Absolutely.
So much work. Yeah.
So you've mentioned a few times, and I know we've talked before, obviously you work so far in advance because from what we're seeing, right? Like we're getting issues, we're about to get issue 150. As you said, you're already working on next year. So has it always been such a big lead time? Have you always been that far ahead? Like obviously even on the Tomorrow's website, I think it's already, the listings are at least already up there up to issue 156, which is again pretty far ahead of where we are at the moment. Has that always been the case? Have you always worked that far ahead? Is that just a function of publishing and maybe I'm just naive? Like I'm just curious.
Oh no, I probably work farther ahead than most people, and I guess there's a couple of reasons for that. One, I used to edit the Legion of Superheroes, so I was in the future, right? So I'm just I've been 1,000 years in the future all this time. So I mean, just to work a year in advance, it doesn't seem that far ahead. But no, years ago when I started in the business back in January 1988 is when I started editing, and I was working at Comico, the comic company, which most people look at and they say Comico, which I did too when I walked in the door and got corrected. No, it's pronounced Comico. I thought, okay, well, I never would have known that by reading Comico. But anyway, there you go. But Diana Schutz, was the editor-in-chief and my boss and my mentor, and I just learned so much from her. And she worked in advance, and when there's a problem, it's a heck of a lot easier to fix. And so the nature of the beast in comics has always been, we even talk about the dreaded deadline doom like it's a character, like it's a super villain that comes out of a lair every now and then just to mess up people and their schedules and lives. But there's always going to be stuff that happens. And for me, I do this, I partially do it because of these solicitation catalogs. Because not only does Tomorrow's have that information, because 156, right now it's the end of January as you and I speak, 2024. 156 comes out in November. So that's still an issue for this year, but I've got covers for a few issues after that. And I'm working a little ahead into mid-2025 now. It just gives structure. I get people writing stuff now that, when you're dealing with a one-person editorial staff, too. That's a whole different thing. Back in the days when I was on staff at comic book companies, there was a whole support mechanism, and an assistant editors, associate editors, whatever, somebody to do your photocopying for you, somebody to package up stuff for you. Well, these days, I work from home. I've been working from home forever, but I do it all. I do my own contracts. I have to create all this stuff from scratch, administration. And so I'm hands-on with that stuff. So it just keeps me on track and keeps me focused as to what's going on. And, essentially, right now, there's probably about 5 different stages of production that different issues of back issue are in. And that's not unlike how monthly comic books are produced. If you were working at DC or Marvel, just to use the big two as the example, and you're an editor, it's not I will produce issue 1, and then I will produce issue 2, and then I will produce issue 3, and to start the process as they come out. Oh, no, you would never have anything come out on time, and you would be fired very quickly if you did not have work in a state of perpetuity. I can't say the word this morning, in a perpetual state of movement. Okay, I got tongue twisted on that, but you just have to. So I'm on the cusp of, tomorrow I will be announcing the assignments for issue 159, which is the one I mentioned to you a moment ago, the Crisis 40th anniversary issue. Mm-hmm. I have already announced the issue to the writers, and we can do this in email. I have a writer's list, but the writers will pitch appropriate ideas as I open the floor for some articles, and then I read the different pitches and then make assignments from whoever pitch was the strongest. And then I'll start to generate contracts and get those people working, and they'll have 6-7 months or so to produce the article. And in the meantime, I'm right now Issue 152 is in layout, so I just finished 153's edits, and it's been uploaded to Dropbox waiting for the designer. There is a cover being colored on another issue, meaning there's just a lot of things I have to juggle. So, but they keep it, if back issue has ever gotten to the stands late over the 20-plus years we've been out, it's been a shipping delay that was caused by another factor. I will say very proudly that I've never delivered an issue late. I cannot say that about my previous comic book work as an editor because I got behind a few times, or I had not learned. Let me rephrase that. Other people got behind. I had not learned how to corral it yet. And the best thing to do is just work for me to plan and work in advance, know where you're going. And that way, when something happens and stuff happens, even editors get sick too. It just, sometimes the show must go on. The magazine must come out, and working in advance is the way to keep it going. Because even if, my computer crashed. I've worked on the same iMac for years. In early December, it died. It just crashed. I did not back up some files. I had lost some stuff, and yes, if you stick your head out the window, you might still be able to hear 2 months later the reverberations of my screens that day when the computer died. Oh, man, I went nuts. It was bad. But I shook it off, and, you just kind of move forward. I had to recreate some stuff, but it was fresh in mind, and yes, I ended up having to redo work, and I lost a lot of time because I was dumb and didn't do something as simple as back up all of my files as I should have. And I've been doing this for over 30 years. And, it's one of those things, you get in the comfort zone. Okay, I'll be all right. I'll be there tomorrow. I'll do it. When I got to get up and go do laundry or something, and move. I am backing up stuff so much. It's like I type a paragraph and I back up the file, and now I am so gun shy with this. I will never let it happen again. But but it has worked for me. It's helped me working in advance. Just keep everything on time, and you know where you're going. And and again, if there's a problem, it's easy to fix.
So I have a hypothetical question for you. So in the last couple of years, Tomorrow's had put out a few collections of Alter Ego magazine where they did collector's item classics, where they kind of put 3 issues in one. So it was a kind of a bigger book as opposed to just kind of the looser magazines. Are there 3 kind of particular features or themes that if you had the opportunity to do that with back issue that you would put in kind of more of a book format as being kind of these collector's item specials of back issue?
Wow, that's a really interesting question, and one that I have to admit I've never really thought about it. It just has, in the 20, now it's, we're in year 21, years of back issue. We've never done that kind of collection. Early on, when we started, I think it might have happened because Tomorrow's was more in the habit of doing those type of collections with some, amplified contents whenever you would do it. Comic Book Artist, which came before us, did those as well as Alter Ego. I have to admit, I'm not sure how to answer the question because I haven't really thought about what I would do if we were to package something, collecting special issues. I mean, off the top of my head, if we were to gather a few, I would probably want to gather... if I could cherry pick a few to collect, I would probably take, and I have to think for a minute, issue 61 was the DC Tabloids issue, and issue 81 was the DC Reprints issue. They would be a nice mix together, I'm just trying to think thematically. Issue 86 was a Marvel Reprints issue, and that was looking at, material that... all the anthology books that reprinted series throughout the Bronze Age and introduced a lot of us, people who were kids in the Bronze Age, to the material of the Silver and Golden Age because they were reprinting that during those times. But I'm just kind of rambling. That's really not a good answer. I have never really given that thought. So, if John Morrow says we want to do a collected edition of back issue. What are some issues you want to put together? I doubt he'd ask me that. He probably would want to do it chronologically, just starting to maybe gather some of the earlier material. So, I'm not sure what Roy's rationale was to do these issues with Thomas, but it hasn't really been a factor for back issue yet. So that's one that's a little harder question to answer.
That's okay. It's interesting because I think in some ways Alter Ego is more easily set up to do something like that. Like the most recent one they did was collecting like the Steve Ditko, the Stan Lee, and the Jack Kirby focused issues that came out recently. So that kind of was easier because each one was kind of a focus on a creator. And again, that's never been the remit of back issue. Back issue has had different types of themes, but it's a lot more broad. So I can understand why it's harder to kind of think of specifics, that would work even thematically in a collection because it has been a little bit more disparate.
Yes, sir. That's well said too, and you're that's very true. And it actually goes back to the rationale behind back issue. Back in 2002, 2003, when we decided to do the magazine, and essentially John Morrow, the publisher, approached me. He was looking for a book on his schedule to replace Comic Book Artist, which had gone to a different publisher at that time, and he had the title Back Issue, and but and he had a couple of ideas that he wanted in it. The greatest stories never told and pro-to-pro interviews were what John brought to the mix, and then we started to add other stuff as we started to talk about it. But that remit, as you called it, goes back to that. I started to think, well, what we do not want to do is replicate comic book artists. And so comic book artists was about the people. And so that's when I just decided from day one, well, what's the title of this magazine, this back issue? That tells me old comic books. So that's what we're going to talk about. And, of course, you do have to, and you cannot escape talking about the creators. But with the exception of these few issues that, like the ones, there's only been 4 in the history of the magazine, and one of them hasn't come out yet, that we've really just done a full-on issue that focuses on an individual, but it's been their work, not their lives, per se.
Mm-hmm.
It's been Steve Gerber, and then Neil Adams, George Perez, and then the upcoming Keith Giffen. Will it happen again in the future? I do not know. It's not my inclination to do those issues, but these are guys that were just so darn prolific and just had so much stuff out there that, and we were still early enough in our run with the Gerber issue, which was back issue number 31. And I am so surprised in 20 plus years into this, I can still pull these issue numbers out of the sky, man. And I will probably flub one though now that I've bragged and patted myself on the back. Watch me screw it up for the rest of the conversation we're going to have as I try to cite issue numbers. But there you go.
Since our last conversation, I think the last time we spoke, I think it was about to come out, or I don't think it come out yet, but in the last couple of years, obviously, you have the Team Up Companion, which definitely feels like a labor of love. It's a fantastic book. Everyone should pick it up. It's really a fun guide to Silver and Bronze Age Team Up comics. How early, when did you first talk with John about publishing a book like this? Was this something that gestated for a long time because you have this love of this type of period, or at what point did this book get greenlit, and what was it like writing it?
Okay, I'm really glad you asked me that too, because I love that book. I love Team Up comics, and anybody who's been a reader of Back Issue and read my editorials, I've known that The Brave and the Bold was essentially my gateway comic book, and I'm not alone. Those Team Up comics, Marvel Team Up, with Spider-Man as a star, Marvel 2-in-1 with The Thing. And The Brave and the Bold with Batman were the primary ones. You also had a permutation of World's Finest, which featured Superman teaming up with people without Batman, and then later DC Comics Presents, which was long run in 1980s or started in the late 70s book for DC, which was a Superman team up book. So I just love that stuff. And I had done a number of companion books, previously for Tomorrow's on DC properties. In the back of my head, I would have loved to have done a Brave and the Bold one, but there was one in the works some time back, and there were a number of other DC-related companions. But when personnel changed to DC, things changed a bit. This goes back a ways now, probably some 12, 15 years. But the DC-related companions from Tomorrow's kind of went away because licensing fees and stuff changed, and it just it became more difficult for a smaller publisher like Tomorrow's to be able to afford to do a book like that. So any hope that I had maybe, or anybody had back then to do a companion book on the Brave and the Bold was kind of squashed. But I never forgot all that stuff, and I just still thought that was a good subject for a book, and pitched it to John about a year or year and a half before it came out. I wrote it. I researched it and wrote it in about 8 months' time. It's a dense book. I mean, I literally read, and now this doesn't mean I pored over and memorized every single word, but I read all 150 issues of Marvel Team Up and all the Brave and the Bolds, and I mean, I went through it all again, and just looking for specifics to write about too. I went through. I interviewed a few people I knew. I went through archived interviews about the material, and just did chapters on the different Team Up books, and really went into the nuts and bolts of the behind the scenes stuff. And there's an index at the end of the book that bullets all the specifics of all the team-ups. I have chapters on some weird stuff like Western Team-Up, which was this really weird book that Marvel did in the early 70s with the Two-Gun Kid, Rawhide Kid. I mean, teaming up these guys. It was just so bizarre. I have a chapter on the second brand-new Scooby-Doo television series, which, Hanna-Barbera history, the thing that followed Scooby-Doo, Where Are You, was the new Scooby-Doo movies, and that essentially was Scooby-Doo Team Up, which there, of course, has been a number of comic books that DC published now with that title, but the original was in the 70s on TV, and they were teaming up Scooby-Doo every week with everybody, weird as Batman and Robin to Sonny and Cher. It was just the most bizarre stuff, the Addams Family. But to me, that was concurrent with our timeline, which is Silver and Bronze Age. That's a teenage companion. So, yeah, I wrote the book at night. I don't sleep a lot, and, we're in the middle of the morning or the middle of the night, and I get up very early in the morning, and have kept peculiar hours for years, but it was a labor of love, as you said. It's sold okay so far. I keep, it's doing pretty well. The people who are predisposed to it have loved it. But it's not the kind of book, too, that every single comic book fan would maybe immediately be drawn to. But it is, if you love the concept of team-ups, it is the book. It is the Bible for that whole thing. And again, a team-up, just to define it, a team-up is a comic book that basically has two characters' logos side by side. It is a special comic that is prepared to team up characters. It is not a guest appearance. If you have Daredevil doing a guest appearance in an issue of Amazing Spider-Man, well, technically, yes, they are teaming up, but it's not a team-up comic that really becomes a character appearance, a guest appearance. The same thing with Super Team comics. If you put Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Flash, Green Lantern, all those guys together, that's the Justice League. That's not an issue of the Brave and the Bold. Mm-hmm. So I focused on those team-up comics. There's also a wonderful section there on the original Marvel DC team-ups, starting with, in my eye, one of the best single issues of a comic book ever published, Superman versus the Amazing Spider-Man. Mm-hmm. 1976. It came out December 1975, that tabloid-sized comic. Mm-hmm. wow, that great cover, it is iconic. That's one I wish they could do a facsimile edition of today, but it's highly unlikely that DC and Marvel would come to an agreement, but I hope they would. They would both prosper from that. That would sell a ton of copies if they were to reprint that again. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's interesting.
So you read the Team-Up Companion, did you, Adam? You read the Team-Up Companion?
Yeah, no, it was a fantastic read. It's interesting. You mentioned the index. Love the index. Like, I mean, it's obviously it looks like it took a lot of work, but I mean, I like that that you don't just list what they are, but like you have like the team-up trivia. You have like the synopsis, who the characters are, the creators. Like, there's a lot of information packed into every single one of these log lines, which I really appreciated because it gives you really quick hits to kind of experience this kind of stuff. And yeah, so I thought this was extremely well researched, obviously, but a lot of fun to read. And so, yeah, your passion for the material really comes through. But yeah, that index, like, was that pretty early on that you knew you wanted to include something like that? Like, I'm curious, as you were breaking it down, at what point were you like, no, an index is extremely important?
Well, I just think that the nature of this kind of book, and it just calls out for an index. The kind of laser focus that I apply to these team-up comics is I'm not only telling you the stories behind the stories, but I was pulling out the weird little stuff. You know, some of the things that you might have seen on a sign in the background. I mean, I would bullet them in the index that could have very well just been a plug or a nuance or something of the era, a reflection of the time. But these are little things that just kind of tie into the history, the zeitgeist of the era. I mean, and I'm thinking of, it was Marvel 2-in-1 where you actually got to see Ben Grimm wearing a John Travolta Saturday Night Fever disco suit. And the same thing was in The Brave and the Bold, where you got to see Bruce Wayne in the same darn kind of suit at a disco with Barry Allen. It's just this weird stuff that would happen in some of the team-up books, too, that might not have happened in the characters' host books, because the team-up books tended to, especially The Brave and the Bold, run with a little looser set of rules at times. They weren't as married to continuity, at least not initially, than the main books were. And that means that some weird stuff would sometimes happen in the team-up books. I wrote a chapter in Team-Up Companion, as you know, on Bob Haney. He did he basically created the team-up concept when he did the first Brave and the Bold team-up, which was Green Arrow and Martian Manhunter, which again was just kind of a strange pairing back in the day, but 1963 or so when that happened. But yeah, he just came up with that concept, and I was able to take it for a pretty heavy book that you could probably put underneath a small child to make sure they could fit at the dinner table. It wasn't quite tome volume, but it was getting there. It was a pretty thick book, and I'm just pleased with it. I had a great time. So thank you for your comments about it too. I'm glad you get it, and yeah. I am. Thank you.
Having read that many, all the team-up books for this book, did you come away with it with increased appreciation for certain writers, or for someone who is like, who would you say is maybe the most skilled at crafting one of these types of team-ups? Would it have been Haney, or would it have been someone else?
Wow, that is a brilliant question. I think that as far as somebody really skilled at it, I mean, Jerry Conway has a great amount of skill at that, and he did the Superman Spider-Man one, and very wisely decided to just base it on Earth team up and try to say this is the DC universe, which is always had a Spider-Man and Dr. Octopus. We just haven't talked about them, or the reverse. He just said this is on its own special place because this is a special event. But Haney, I mean, all these things. When you do as deep a dive into it as I did, you celebrate the passion and the joys, but you're pulling the Band-Aid off and exposing the scabs and the scars and the wounds. I mean, there's some things that just some of the issues were just clunky. I mean, I'm trying to be kind. And sometimes they just needed the team, Spider-Man with this guy. And it's just one of those issues that you read, and 10 minutes later, like, okay, well, what was the plot? You just kind of move past it. But you might remember that great fight scene. I mean, not all of these were works of art, but there's something just fun about it. The team-up comics overall, to me, and a lot of other people, I think, would maybe say something similar to this, is kind of like going to the beach, kind of like going to the fair, kind of like, going out for ice cream. It was something special. It wasn't just another issue of a comic book. It wasn't, it's Spidey fighting Doc Ock, this issue of Amazing Spider-Man. This was like, wow, Spider-Man and the Gargoyle. That's weird, Let's see how they get together, and sometimes, Mike Barr, now that I'm thinking, he's a guy who was really kind of good at this. In contemporary times, I'm thinking back about, a while back, Mark Waid did a resurrection of the Brave and the Bold, and I love Mark's current writing at DC because he writes the characters as in a very contemporary fashion, but he still writes. When he writes Aqualad, it's still the Aqualad that was in the comics of the 60s. It's like he captures their characterization and just writes that for a contemporary audience, but it's the same characters. And I feel that, whereas other contemporary writers will tend to adapt the characters to contemporary environments and times, and they're not necessarily what they were in the day. They're kind of what that writer has made them become. But Mark Waid just takes these guys, and it's still the old guys, but they're living in today, and they're living, very much like, real people of the day, but they're still the characters we knew. But to go back to Bob Haney, he was just the master of the done-in-one story. He could come up with plots that sometimes they were absolutely ludicrous, and they often stretched belief. But man, were they exciting. They just were, page turners, and they just kept you motivated. And you just got excited about what was going to happen next. And you just had to keep turning the page. And Batman teaming up with the Joker, that was Brave and the Bold with 111. Well, it's been done many, many times since then. But, come on, Batman teaming up with his arch nemesis, that was unheard of, and so sometimes the team-up comics would make you pose that question.
I'm curious.
How on earth do they get these two guys together? What's going to happen next? And, I love the stuff, and it's clear that I do, but I'm glad that there are people like you who do as well. Thank you for buying and reading my book.
For sure. What I thought was interesting, just thinking about you as a writer and as a researcher, is that, and I mentioned like really enjoying the team up trivia, but it's interesting, like I guess as a practice in terms of formulating your research and going through all these books, it must have been a way to kind of assist you with active reading, if that makes any sense, because you're kind of looking for that nugget or that interesting thing. And what I like is how different your team up trivia is based on the issue. Like sometimes it'll be like, oh, this is the first appearance. I think one I saw was like Commandy's most recent appearance was in here, so you're adding historical context. And others it's oddities like, oh, Spider-Man appropriates clobbering time in this particular issue, like from Ben Grimm's famous saying. Like I liked the breadth that you used, but I would imagine it definitely aided you in your kind of active reading to keep invested in, because it is a lot of issues to read, and obviously it is fun because you do love this stuff anyway, but to give you an added sense of, okay, I'm looking for something specific while I'm reading this great issue to kind of pick out for this trivia. So I really appreciated the team up trivia, but I'm curious how you felt as a way of to kind of keep the index moving.
The index I mean, it was like a wood burning stove I had to keep feeding. It just was this perpetual work in progress. Whereas the chapters, they were a big work in progress when I was diving into those respective series, and I pretty much did those one at a time. You know, I couldn't simultaneously be reading Marvel Team Up and Brave and the Bold issues. I had to just kind of really focus my attention into each of those, single concepts. So some of the chapters were deeper dives and took much longer time than others. But the index, though, I just kept feeding it as I was reading. And the letters columns is something I need to bring up too. They were extremely beneficial just to find the trivia that had been forgotten, or some people would never even know it was trivia that existed in the first place, meaning the plans that were announced but ended up being unrealized. There's often stuff that you have planned, or an editor would, and I've logged enough hours now at the editor's desk to know that there's something in the works that you have on your desk, and you will mention it in a letters column. And then, for whatever reason, it doesn't work out. It doesn't happen. Plans change. And then you still have that little thing that you floated out there. And sometimes you just say, well, I'm just going to forget it. Maybe they'll forget it. We'll move on. And sometimes, though, it's probably best to say, well, that is just not going to happen. And say it in print, because there are people like me who will dig it up 30 years later and write about it as saying, whatever happened to that Silver Surfer team up that you were supposed to do in giant-sized Spider-Man? So, yes, there was going to be a Spider-Man Silver Surfer team up. And I even asked Jerry Conway, I said, whatever happened to that? And he didn't remember. So I don't say that to this Jerry, because I'm saying it because it was 50-something years ago. I don't remember all the stuff I was thinking about 50 years ago either. And Jerry's defense and all the other wonderful people who have contributed to my books and back issue over the decades now, can you imagine picking up the phone or answering an email where somebody's asking you to go into detail about, some aspect of your job that you did 50, 40 years ago? It's like, come on. Most people can't remember what they had for breakfast 2 days ago. And for us to go to people and ask them to tell us all these stories, regale us. I'm just thrilled that we've been able to capture as many as we can, and I'm certainly not surprised when I get I don't remember, that happens. There's a lot of stuff that I started to even just 30 years ago that I could not tell you specifically why it didn't happen. Because, memories tend to fade at times. And other times they're crystal clear.
As you demonstrated with your recall of specific back issue numbers.
I know. It just comes out of nowhere. I can do that pretty well, too, with The Brave and the Bold. I can tell you the majority of the issues who teamed up with Batman. But please don't ask me one, because you will... It's like if I ever made it onto Jeopardy. I'm much too stupid. But if I ever were lucky enough to make it onto Jeopardy, it would be the one day where, all categories in both Jeopardy and Final Jeopardy would be subjects I know nothing about. And I would just sit there with my jaw open and just thinking, am I ever going to be able to press the button?
My last comment about the companion is, and again, this is, I apologize, because I like the book, not just the index, I promise, but a lot of my questions apparently are index focused, so I do apologize for that. But what I took away from looking at the index...
I'm glad somebody read it. I didn't know if anybody was ever going to read the index, so no, this is thrilling to me, so you do not have to apologize.
Okay.
Go ahead.
One thing which really hit me looking at the index, going through it, is that everyone worked on these things. Like, every name you can imagine from this period shows up in some fashion or another. They either edited it, or they wrote it, or they inked it, or they penciled it. Like, it was really fascinating to me to see the cross-section of, everyone who was working in comics at this time. This wasn't like a silo. This is everyone at some point worked in one of these kind of team-up books. And I don't know if I had realized that it was really a proving ground, and that you had... And it makes sense, because the books change based on who's teaming up in that particular issue, right? So it makes sense that there would be, more often than not, a general flux of the people working on it, as opposed to a Spider-Man comic. Certain artists are going to be more predisposed to working on Spider-Man, whereas on a team-up book, it could be anyone. But I really, it hit me looking at your index and realizing that everyone worked on these things.
Oh, absolutely, you're right. And there was a time, and particularly in the, I think by the time the late 70s and early 80s had come around, Marvel Team-Up in particular was really kind of a training ground book in a way. I mean, there were times when you'd have a writer sign on, like Mark DeMatteis, J.M. DeMatteis, when he came on board to Marvel Team-Up late in its run. That's when he was doing the really quirky run of Defenders, too. He actually was doing some supernatural stuff in Marvel Team-Up, which maybe seemed a little odd for Spider-Man, but again, that's a cool thing about Spider-Man, and why he works so well in Marvel Team-Up. And the same thing with The Thing. These characters, they are the two everymen of the Marvel Universe. Ben Grimm and Peter Parker. And so that's why they work so well in the team-up environment. Their personalities were well-honed. And, I mean, come on. All the different changes we've read in these characters over the years, still, at least with Ben Grimm, the Thing has always been the Thing. I don't think two people have ever categorized him to where it didn't seem like they were writing the same character. So, and the multifaceted thing about the Thing is, well, he's a monster. He's a teddy bear. He's a big brother. He is a scientist. He is he's a pilot. He is the friend of a scientist. He's a strong guy. He's an astronaut. So he can fit into any of these environments. And so, yeah, you can put him in a monster story. You can put him in a sci-fi story. You can put him in a horror story. It's like all this stuff. Spider-Man, Peter Parker's a scientist, and he's funny. He's quirky. Batman and Superman were also adaptable to other characters, even though Superman's a hard one to team up somebody with because he can so dwarf the other characters. So you then have to start to employ some of the trappings of using a Superman weakness to make Superman need to team up with somebody. But I do want to say one thing about the team-up trivia that you mentioned, too. They were add-ons, and I'm so glad that they are. One of the things that is a rationale behind a book like this is there are a lot of different companies' characters there, so it is produced under the auspices of copyright. I am totally drawing a blank. Forgive me. This is one of the issues I have today. I don't want to get into this too deeply, but I am dealing with cancer treatment, and occasionally I have a lapse. And this is what I didn't want you to ask me for even the bold number.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Now it's okay. Now you caught me, but it's just a fact of life, and I have to go on. And but it's a fair use. It came to me. There you go. Fair use copyright. So we basically have to make sure that you have a balance of material you can't have too much of one company there. So the team up trivia thing also opened the door to create opportunities for us to feature a lot of different characters and concepts in the book that tied into the team-up concept. So my favorite was a team-up trivia, which I had the header Suspicious Minds, and it had a photo of Elvis Presley in his Vegas suit and President Richard Nixon. And it just very briefly, in like a paragraph, told the story of Nixon and Elvis meeting when Elvis came to the White House. And that was a team-up during the Bronze Age of comics, so to speak. But I folded in stuff like that, as well as some other things, like the $6 Million Man and Bionic Woman. They teamed up a lot on TV. And Shazam and ISIS on TV. Those things, those became the team-up trivia bits. They were just little sidebars that peppered the book, but they ended up being so much fun. And we ended up adding a lot, literally at the 11th hour. I scrambled the last couple of days we were getting this book to press. We just decided, for a couple of reasons, to pull out a few pieces of art that were there and put team-up trivias in their place. But I was looking for a few at the end, and that's when I started to think about some other things, and like Lionel Ross and Diana Ritchie. In the early 80s, there were all these team-ups of these big stars that became a thing. So I did a little sidebar on that, and they were chronologically fit in the book. Like Marvel team-up started in the early 70s and ran through the mid-80s. So the team-up trivias that might have peppered the Marvel team-up chapter were chronological. So all this stuff is in my head as I'm structuring the book. And also, this goes back to back issue. Usually they are chronological. If you look at the material, not always, but usually the order of articles in an issue of back issue will kind of run as to how they were published chronologically.
Interesting.
Sometimes I will fudge that. If there's just to keep the contents moving creatively, or if I have a couple of very long articles, I don't want to put two very long articles back to back. I want to have a shorter one or shorter feature in between to make it easier to read. Because, I'm always looking at the readability factor for issues, for each issue. And I just don't want it to be too dense. I don't want a 20-page article followed by a 14-page article. No, throw a short 4-page article in there to kind of break it up. But I do try to have the material move chronologically throughout the issue. So, not always. But if you do go back and flip through them, you'll notice that is probably the rule of thumb more than not.
Interesting. I did like the team up timeouts. I think one of my favorite was the Megilla Gorilla versus Yogi Bear for president.
Yeah. Did you know that was a thing?
No, I had no idea.
No, yeah. They ran for president in 1964. I don't think they campaigned very hard outside of that one Gold Key comic book, but I don't know if they actually got any votes, because anybody that read the comic book probably was not of the age to vote. So there you go. But it's just the strange stuff like that. A lot of the research was done. There is a website that I recommend. The easiest way to find it is dcindexes.com. It's called Mike's Amazing World of DC Comics. Mike, oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank to fill his last name. He passed away very recently.
That's right, yeah.
His website still is up, and it's I hope it's always there. He works so hard on it. There's a feature there called the newsstand, and that's what I'm referring to. Mm-hmm. You can go to the newsstand and see month by month, filtered either in cover date month or the actual month of release date. You can see every single comic book published in a given month, and you can either filter that through just the publishers or everything. And so what I literally did, Adam, for the Team Up Companion is I started with, the first years of the Silver Age, and I went through the middle of the 80s, which is the end of the Bronze Age, and I went month to month looking at every single comic book cover just to see if there's anything there that might have been considered a team-up that I might not have known about. And that's how I found some of this stuff, just by, trolling month after month after month after month. So the research is laborious, it's deep, and but it's fun. It is so much fun, but it takes a long time. And my wife just lets me go, dig into this stuff. And some guys go get into trouble, and they do things that they're not supposed to do. I just go read old comic books, so my wife knows where I am. she never has to bail me out or make any excuse for it other than, well, he's just a grown man who reads old comic books. And she knows I'm not alone. And I'm not causing any trouble. So there you go.
I will say, so I guess my last comment on the Team Up Companion, that I very much enjoyed it. I think it's probably at the top in terms of my favorite Tomorrow's books now with Comic Book Implosion. So my apologies to Keith Dallas.
Really?
There's a tie now. And that's a very niche book too. You talk about, niche books. I mean, I don't know if there's a more niche comic book history book out there than the Comic Book Implosion book.
You might be right about that, yeah. Yeah, that certainly does look at a very narrow window of time and a very specific event, a series of events that happened from one thing, but that implosion. But yeah, you're right. And now there is an expanded second edition that's coming out of that book, and I think that's thrilling to see that. But that's sort of Tomorrow's niche in a way, to find that type of aspect of comic book history and comics oral histories, and share them and just dig deep where others dare not tread. So, we go there, and it's not everybody's cup of tea. I mean, the thing is to go back to the Team Up Companion, I know that there's some people who won't care about that book at all. And while, of course, I wish that everybody who loved comics would read it, but I take more satisfaction in knowing that people like you who love this stuff really love this book. I would rather have a small group of people who really just love a niche book like that or a niche project like that than... I don't know. Well, I don't know. Would I want a larger, adoring public? Well, maybe if it had a few really big paychecks attached to it, maybe. But what I do is, it is a labor of love. And when I connect with people like you who get it and love it too, I couldn't be happier. So, what a blessing. I've got no complaints about that. I'm a lucky guy.
So it's funny, I originally reached out to you to come back on the podcast to talk about the upcoming issue 150. We've not talked about it at all. It's been about an hour.
Maybe we need to do it again, yeah.
So I know I don't want to keep you too much longer, but what can you give me a little bit about 150? Because I'm curious about it, because again, we talked about, what you did with the 20th anniversary, what you did with the 10th anniversary, what you did with the 100th issue. Obviously, you had this, a focus on centennial issues, which made sense. So how did you approach issue 150? Did it have any special meaning to you, or in terms of like the 150 threshold, is that a real thing that matters? I know that you've talked about this before, your magazine has anyway, about the idea of what anniversary issues were and are. So how did you approach 150?
Well, 150 was, in the past, those issues did have some significance. I mean, essentially, the centennials were always the big ones, so 100, 200, etc. And there, you can probably count on just a couple of hands how many series have gone beyond, into really, really long numbers. But as far as 150 is concerned, the 150 issues, most people, I don't know, they never were quite, the sesquicentennial issue just never really just has the punch of the centennial, or tricentennial. But it's still an important thing. You've made it this far, and it's just, to me, it's one of those numbers. I don't know, maybe issue 175 of back issue get a shout out. I don't know, probably not again until 200. But it just seems significant to me. And Batman is a topic that is been one that we've been able to mine repeatedly, and it's not just back issue. I mean, wow, how many books have been written about Batman? How many times have people done the reboots of different visions and versions of Batman? It's all out there. So, but we covered Batman a handful of times, but there's just been a number of people whose work just didn't get enough coverage, and they were sort of unsung heroes in a way. And so when we decided to do something special for the 150th. Batman just came to mind. Herb Novick and Bob Brown were probably the two big journeymen of Bronze Age Batman stories. Their work might have been solidified in many cases by Dick Giordano, who was yet another who produced a lot of Batman work in so many capacities. And sometimes, though, we tend to think of the Adams and the Perros and not as much as some of the other guys who were there doing this wonderful work. So Frank Robbins was another one. Mm-hmm. Robbins wrote a lot of stuff. He drew a few of them, and I was one of those kids who in the 70s when Robbins drew a Batman story, I freaked out. I thought it was ugly and horrific. And, I never wrote letters, but a lot of people did. Bob Rozakis would comment in the letters columns. He was a kid, young man, assistant editor then. He would write about that. Oh, boy, got some people didn't like that Frank Robbins art. But Robbins was so stylistic. It was easy. I look back at it now as an adult with a much more discerning artistic taste. And I see what he was doing. Very moody look, but it was kind of freaky looking. It just wasn't mainstream looking. I was still used to that, and I had an idea in my head of what Batman was supposed to look like, and it was the Neil Adams version. And this didn't look like that. But but there are people out there that were doing powerful work, amazing work. Walter Simonson is one of those guys we spotlighted in 150. He was up and coming at the time, but ended up doing a number of very significant Batman stories over time. And then Frank Miller, he was sort of the last one we spotlighted in the issue, but only his very first story, the one he did in 1979, the Wanted Dead or Alive, Santa Claus, that's not quite the title, that's close. But in the DC Holiday Special, where Denny O'Neil wrote the story, Frank Miller drew a Batman Christmas story, but it was Miller's first Batman story, and some of the visual tricks that he would later employ in Dark Knight, embryonic versions were in that story. So just a lot of great people. We did a thing on Bernie Wrightson's Batman in the issue, and Alex Toth. Fabulous work there. And a few art galleries on people like Michael Kaluta and Jim Starlin. Some fun stuff in there.
Absolutely. What I always appreciate about the magazine is how you play with the covers, and and issue 150 is a good example because again it has that style of kind of 70s book because of how you have the 100 pages at the top and kind of it evokes that style of the time. And it's not the first time obviously that you've done kind of fun, cool looking covers like that, like the Neil Adams issue 143, where you had Neil Adams' name kind of in where it would usually be Batman, right, on the kind of the Batman.
Absolutely,
it was a really cool design.
Yeah, thank you. You have to give a shout out to Michael Cronenberg, who is the cover designer of Back Issue. He created that Neil Adams logo, mimicking the 1970s Batman logo. And these, occasionally when we do change the logo on Back Issue, Michael has been doing that. We've got another one coming up for 159. He actually did Back Issue's logo in a font that replicates Crisis. But you will notice, too, as you look at those, I always ask that the traditional Back Issue logo be on the cover somewhere in miniature. So we still keep our brand on there. But, yeah, we would work that stuff out. I when we do those covers, I will look through source material to find the images, and I write the copy and send it to Michael, and he designs the covers and then does this wonderful work to recreate, say, with 150, we did the replication of the super spectaculars of the 70s, and he's so good at that. And I do want to give a shout out to the interior and a designer too, Rich Fowlks. He just does great work, and he also did the Team Up Companion. So if you like the Team Up Companion, you like Rich's work. He is a fabulous designer, and he's done a number of other projects for Tomorrows. He did Chris Irving's book, Cliffhanger, that came out this last summer, which was a look at the comics-related movie serials of the 40s and 50s. And wow, great book, great book, and yeah, it makes the magazine look fabulous as well.
A question I have about an upcoming cover. So back issue 154 is coming soon, which is a thematic sequel, I guess, to 139, which was the not ready for primetime Marvel players. And now you have the DC version, and the cover kind of evokes that same idea, same sensibility. What I thought was interesting about it, and maybe this was intentional, maybe it wasn't, is that on 139, where you have 4 different characters, but it almost looks like they're kind of ripped in terms of how the panel layout looks, which was very more of a Marvel style. And then when you do it for 154, it's more rigid boxes, which again evokes more of a DC style. Was that a conscious choice, or am I just reading something into it?
Oh, absolutely. No, you're not reading anything into it. You were describing exactly what my thinking was going into the process. In 139, when I was writing an editorial about the genesis of that issue, it actually kind of oddly started with one of the writers, Dan Tandridge. Had for a couple of years been saying, I really want to write about Stingray. And I said, okay, well, yes, we'll do it, but I just got to find the right theme. And, let's see, a marine biologist who is a part-time superhero. It's kind of hard to find a theme, to match it. And I kept thinking about that character, and then, let's just do an issue of all these guys, and we're quite A-list, and it just made sense. So, and wanting to... That cover for 139 evolved because I originally was going to spotlight one of those characters, but couldn't really find one that I thought was strong enough, with maybe the exception of Doc Samson. So I just decided to do the group cover, and then so what do you do? And then I was looking at old comics from the era and saw this Fantastic Four cover that had 4 segments and the big Kirby energy splash in the middle to segment them, and then, well, let's just take this. And we homaged it, referenced it in the letters column, and just replicated this look and just did 4 different images from comics that they were characters that we were focusing on. So, yes, for the DC, I wanted to have a similar representation of different characters, but yes, as you said, in that era, back in the Bronze Age, DC's covers for Giants were always blocky, and so as I was starting to look for things, who was the chief cover artist back then? Nick Cardy. Well, I did it before in the past, and we did the DC reprints issue. That was issue 81. It was a Nick Cardy cover that we cannibalized from taking Nick Cardy original art from Heritage from different covers and just piecing it together. Did the same thing here, and it worked out fine. Lilith was a Teen Titans cover. Metamorpho was from the Brave and the Bold cover. The Bartox was from the Superman cover. And who else is on that cover right now? Who am I forgetting? Are you looking at it by any chance? I'm trying to do this from memory.
I'm not seeing it in great... hold on. Nubia.
I'm going to look at that. Who is it?
Nubia, the other Wonder Woman.
Oh, Nubia. Yeah. That was the Wonder Woman versus Nubia cover, and all 4 of those covers were early 70s covers by Nick Cardy. So, well, here we go. We have a new, air quotes, new Nick Cardy cover again, just using original art that he had done previously, just excising portions of the panels of the art into panels, and then having Glenn Whitmore, our cover colorist, who always does a great job, color it in. And then Michael Cronenberg slaps it together, and we replicate the look of a DC Giant of the 70s, and there you go. I even went through, at the bottom of that cover, you've got like a little headshot of Black Canary and a little headshot of Jimmy Olsen. Well, I found that Black Canary on a World's Finest 100-page cover, and I found the Jimmy Olsen on a Superman Family 100-page cover, and all done by Nick Cardy. And so we just, cannibalized all the stuff and made a cover and made a new Nick Cardy cover out of using old Nick Cardy art. And so it keeps the spirit of what DC was doing back then alive, but it still kind of a fresher perspective for our audience.
Where did you grab the Elongated Man from?
Excuse me. Had to have a sip of water. The Elongated Man, there was in the early 70s, at the top of the Flash logo. The Elongated Man was a backup series. It moved from Detective Comics, where he was in the 60s, to the Flash for a while in the 70s. And they had that blurb with the Elongated Man stretching it. And actually, that's the one thing that makes it not an entirely pure Nick Cardy cover, because Nick Cardy did not draw that. I believe it was Murphy Anderson. But that was a blurb that, the Elongated Man stretching across the top of the Flash to signify to the reader, because back then they were still, you have to remember that most comics were only seeing logos up in either a spin rack or even on a newsstand shelf. The ideal place for your placement was the front of the shelf, because then your entire cover would be seen. But oftentimes, when as kids were looking for comics, you just see the logo. So when you saw the Flash, for those guys that were looking for the Elongated Man, you knew he was in there too. And that's where we took it. It was just from, I don't remember the specific Flash issue, because that appeared on a handful of them in the early 70s.
An upcoming issue.
So yes, we're cannibals here. We cannibalize a lot.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm sorry,
No, I was going to say, in an upcoming issue, I believe it's 152, on the cover, it mentions the Marvel value stamps. It's funny how many times that seems to come up. It seems that was like a real touchstone for people at the time. Were you one of those people who was like into the value stamps?
No, because at that point, I had just reached the point where I was not going to cut up my comics. So, but I actually had the book, but not the stamp book, but would not cut the thing out of the stamps out of the comics, actually, paste them into the book. But that's just a weird geek thing. But it is a touchstone, though, because it was just so omnipresent. I mean, you could not read a Marvel comic during that era without, the stamps there, and it was always kind of fun. And then, and part of the game that the fan would play that Roy Thomas did so deliciously in this Marvel value stamps book, the visual history that he did, was, the part of the fun is you would try to figure out if you saw that art before, well, where did it come from? Now, sometimes it would be very obvious. Other times you'd have to really do some deep digging if you really wanted to find where that piece of art was picked up from. It's because sometimes it literally was embedded in a story somewhere. But, that was definitely fun. The other thing I really liked about comics of that era, you remember the little blurbs that would appear like a one line of type at the bottom of a page that Marvel was doing in the early 70s, and now some of the facsimile editions that have come out have that, like, Moon Knight, Tangles with Werewolf by Night, and issue 32, whatever, and so that kind of thing. Just a little plug, but it was just something to get fans excited. All these little bells and whistles they used to have that were so much fun, because we didn't have the internet. We didn't have all these mechanisms there to keep information flowing our way. We had to look for it in little ways. I mean, a house ad could sometimes be the most exciting thing in the world, because you had not heard about that upcoming comic until you saw it plugged in the comics themselves.
Absolutely. You did mention earlier, crediting the colorist for the covers. I really love the cover to 148 because it has the Adam Strange cover. Something about the orange really jumps off the page, and I really enjoy, and even the issue I think before that was 147 with the Wonder Woman Perez cover, but you had that blue in the background. Like, there's just something about those colors that are really arresting and really work with the images.
Yeah, you're right. I'm looking at them now. They both pop too. I think contrast is important too. That's old school. Because today I think that the color palette for comics, changed over the years as it became more sophisticated. And when computer coloring started, when I was a comic book editor, they still were doing things old school, the old school separations, which were done, very, very primitive, and didn't have a lot of room for nuances and modeling and gradations and things. And it's just become so much more sophisticated. But I think the concept of a logo screaming at you is not one that is applied in general comics publishing anymore, because they're really selling pieces of art. But in the past, though, that logo was important because you needed it to be visible. And so, to kind of call you like a beacon or a target, as you're looking across the room or across the stands. And so, I like to see that contrast in our logo to be strong, and sometimes it's not. The issue before the Perez issue, the 146 with the Daredevil cover by Gene Colan, well, we repurposed a Marvel pinup that was produced in the early 70s for that, which had a kind of a Will Eisner-like Daredevil logo told or spelled out in buildings in the background. And so Daredevil's name is really prominent at the top of the back issue 146 cover, but we put our logo up there as well, but just to make sure our brand remains intact. But the orange color on the 148 cover, I agree with you, is really, really strong. And it's you generally would probably expect a black space cover or color there, and I really appreciate what Glenn Whitmore did there, because it just enlivened that piece of art. It invigorated it, and I think that he chose that too, because I'm doing this from memory, but I think that originally it was colored with a much darker background, and so this gives it a much fresher perspective. And what a fun cover it was. Murphy Anderson and Carmine Infantino together. Wow. Those were the days.
Absolutely. Now, I promise, I think this will be my last question, so I can actually let you get back to your day. Back issue 145. Now, you mentioned in your missive at the beginning about how Dusty Abell's art ended up being the cover. It's very different for back issue, right? Like, it's a lot, it's much more modern. It's completely chock full of every Spider-Man villain you can imagine. Love this piece. So glad you guys were able to, repurpose it for an issue of back issue. The only thing I wish you guys had done is include an answer key as to who everyone was.
Oh my, that's that would have been a good thing, wouldn't it?
It's the type of thing I like to show it to my son and be like, okay, go. How many Spider-Man villains can you name? But there comes a point where I know a lot of them. I know most of them, but then there are some where I'm like, I don't know who this is anymore.
Well, I wish we had done that. Because I'm thinking back now, in similar things that I had seen, as a kid and a fan growing up too. Whenever you had a big group image, you usually didn't have a key inside, and this is one of those lessons I did learn in comics that I should have applied there, because that would have definitely helped. Because you certainly probably have. I'm looking at it now. I'm looking around and seeing, okay, how many of these characters do I not know who they are? And it would primarily be maybe a few that were maybe a little more contemporary vintage, but a lot of these guys are mostly old school still, even though their rendering style might be a little more contemporary. But I'm glad you brought that up. If we ever do anything like that again, I'm going to have an index inside that identifies all the characters. But I wish we had done it there.
I guess I could always track them down and say, hey, can you please provide an answer key so at least I know who some of these more obscure ones are?
Well, if you ever get to meet Dusty at a convention, if you haven't already, you can ask him to identify them for you.
I'll let you go and get back to your day, but is there any last things you want to mention about upcoming issues? Because as you mentioned, like, you're working on, pretty far ahead already of where we are, but are there any specific things about the next few issues you want to kind of highlight? I mean, I know we got X Babies coming soon. Really excited to see about that, but what other things can you mention or that you want to kind of pump up that comes up in upcoming issues of Back Issue?
Well, I'm just finishing now as we speak a deep dive on issue 153, the Big Baby issue, which is just an absolute hoot with the Arthur Adams X-Baby cover. It's some people might be scratching their heads and this one seems to be a little, out there for Back Issue, and thinking, well, not really. I mean, Franklin Richards and X-Babies is pretty much the kind of stuff that we have been covering for years, the superhero stuff, but Sugar and Spike, some other stuff in there. Marvel published some Dennis the Menace rip-off comics over the years that they all repurposed in the early 70s, too, with stuff like Peter the Little Pest. I mean, we were looking at some stuff that's really just... I remember it being out there, was always kind of curious about it, wasn't that interested, and there's some fun stuff in this issue that I had learned that Marvel had a Super Baby in the 1940s. I just discovered this from just doing research. I had no idea. Did you know that Timely Comics published Super Baby and called him Super Baby before DC published a character that they called Super Baby, even though Superman was shown as a baby in his first stories, and flashbacks or the origins that yeah, Marvel had a Super Baby. That was just the weirdest thing. Yeah, but there have been, right now it's really popular with, Funko Pop and super deformed characters and mini marbles and all this stuff and Scotty Young. I mean, come on, man. All this stuff has just been growing over the past few years, but there was a lot of it going on, even going back to the golden age. I had no idea there had been this many people in diapers with capes flying around for years. It's been going on. So we do a look at some of that, and it's just some wild and fun stuff. I've just really had a great time with this particular issue, and it's familiar, but it also touches on some stuff that we normally wouldn't necessarily cover in Back Issue, and but it's still told in the Back Issue manner. So Sugar and Spike just fascinates me. It Talking Babies. I mean, I discovered it as an adult fan. Because of the merit of its creator, Sheldon Mayer, and the cartooning aspect of it. When I grew to really appreciate that, but it was a comic about babies, so I couldn't really relate to it when I was reading Brave and the Bold, right? But man, there's some really valuable stuff there, interesting stuff, and it's comics history. I mean, Sheldon Mayer was one of the movers and shakers of the golden age, and he just did this fun little baby comic for decades, and actually had there was a myth at DC that he would come back from the dead and haunt you if you ever brought back Sugar and Spike. and Paul Levitz even addresses that briefly in the issue, but Sugar and Spike is just a fascinating concept, and it John Wells, who is one of the writers behind the comic book implosion, and one of our best DC researchers. He just knows so much stuff. He really covered how Sugar and Spike's demise in the early 70s, how the market changes were affecting that. And it's interesting to look at it because it goes deeper than just one comic book. I think it's more of just, it shows you how comics taste and storytelling was really changing throughout the 1970s, and something as simple and as innocuous and innocent as Sugar and Spike just didn't seem to fit in a world that was starting to embrace vampires and kung fu and sword and sorcery. Two little talking babies in diapers just couldn't really hold their own anymore, but there was still this inherent charm about those characters and their history that just refuses to fade.
It's interesting. I mean, I'm always a fan of, like, you know, obviously comic book history, but also like television history. So like I was reading, you know, more last week about, you know, the rural purge, you know, on TV, where they kind of ended all these, you know, top ranked stories that were all set in rural communities and kind of favoring more of an urban setting for, you know, shows going forward. It's interesting how these things evolve over time.
Yes, I know the rural network purge very well. I'm a native North Carolinian, and I bring that up because I love the Andy Griffith Show, which is set here. And Andy Griffith is one of the shows. The Andy Griffith Show, which became Mayberry RFD, was one of the shows that ended up being part of that rural purge in 1970, early 70s when it happened. Because Mayberry RFD was still a top 10 rated show, but they canceled it along with the Beverly Hillbillies and a few other things that were still doing well in the ratings to urbanize, you know, CBS's lineup. But we actually have an article about that in the other magazine I do for tomorrow's Retro Fan. A couple of years ago, we did an article on the retro, the urban rural purge. I'm getting tongue twisted again today, but that was something that I was watching too as a kid, and I was getting into Mary Tyler Moore and the All in the Family, but I missed Arnold the Pig on Green Acres, and they took Arnold away to give us Ted Baxter, but and Archie Bunker, but these are interesting little stories that you pick up over the years from watching TV and reading.
If I can put you on the spot, do you know which issue of Retro Fan it was?
I'm thinking it's 15.
Okay.
But, I'm actually going to go right into the file here and maybe... Actually, let me look it up, and I will email you and let you know.
That'd be great. Yeah, no, it sounds interesting, so I'd definitely be interested in reading it.
Yeah, I'm a little more fluent in citing issue numbers of back issue than I am Retro Fan. Because it's thematic, though. And it's easy for me to kind of remember that number because it's attached to a theme, whereas Retro Fan, there's no thematic structure. Every issue is eclectic. And so I might remember issue 31, which is the one that I just got my copies on. It hasn't quite been released because it has Elizabeth Montgomery from Bewitched on the cover. Now, I will never be able to forget that. It is striking, and this beautiful woman that still enchants people today. She's been gone for a long time, but I have not encountered an individual that we put on a Retro Fan cover yet that has engendered this much affection from men and women than Elizabeth Montgomery. There was something about that woman that just captivated so many millions of people, and here we are in 2024, and I'm able to do a Bewitched cover and still fascinate people. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Absolutely.
The power of some of these actors and these characters, they just, they live, and hey, I guess that's a good way for me to wind it down, to say that it's an honor to have a magazine like Back Issue to be able to present some of those stories and present them anew for readers who may not have, been able to experience them first time around.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it. It's been about an hour and a half. So
very welcome.
But keep putting out such fantastic work. I love Back Issue. I've said before, I regret that I came to it relatively late. I didn't even know about it, and I'm so embarrassed about that because I have loved every issue. I can't wait to get the new issue, and I just kind of voraciously read them. Although, except sometimes when I'm about to go on vacation, I kind of store them up so I can read them on vacation. But the fantastic magazine, so I really appreciate all the time, love, and care you put into them. And I also, as I said, love the Team Up Companion, and it was just such a fun ride. I learned a lot of stuff that I didn't know. I love the index, so I'm very appreciative that you included it. And again, thank you for everything that you do.
Well, you're very welcome. I certainly appreciate hearing that and knowing that you appreciate all the hard work that goes into this and the love. And for me, the labor of love aspect is so important because if I'm passionate about it, hopefully the reader will be passionate about it. And I've seen that also exercised in comic books themselves. You can tell when your writer and artist are vested and they're loving it because you can't help but love it when you read it as well. So good. Well, and thank you for your interest and the time today.
Absolutely.